Okay, so today we have Nicholas Giacomini on the podcast, otherwise known as MC Yogi. Really great to have you here, Nick.
Thanks for having me, Adam. Great to talk, man.
Yeah, you're probably one of the only two musicians I've ever interviewed. Danny Paradise, a Yogi musician, and you. So later on in the podcast, you can expect to hear a few tracks we're going to insert from the MC himself, little snippets of his music. But first of all, I guess you wrote a great book actually, and if you don't know anything about Nick, read Spiritual Graffiti. It's a book that he wrote, and it's an easy book to read. I read it in 2 nights, and it's a fun and nice, and I recommend it. It's a good book, and it's a good way to get to know the guy if you're interested in him and his music. Eh? So just to maybe talk about your early life, Nick, because you have an interesting backstory, and I think it makes your music come alive a lot more when you know a little bit about where you come from.
Well, thanks, man. Well, first of all, just thanks for having me, man. So great to connect. So great to
Yeah,
be in conversation and another fellow yoga nerd, and I found out we're born in the same year. So I'm
same year.
yeah,
When's your
pretty
birthday?
amazing.
Are you 45
August
yet?
August 26th. So I'm gonna be 40. I think of
Five.
45 this year. I
Yeah,
think.
you're
Yeah,
45
yeah,
this year, mate. But a little bit after me. I'm in April, so just a couple months ahead of you. And he's coming from the Bay Area today, so San Francisco, I believe, right?
yeah.
That's where you're living right now.
Yes,
Yeah.
I was born in San Francisco, and actually, that's how the book starts. Is my mom is about to give birth to me on the Golden Gate Bridge, so she's in labor, she's breathing deep, and it was an early Sunday morning, as I understand. I was born early as the sun was rising in San Francisco, and I grew up in that area. Spent my whole life in this area, Northern California, and yoga. Well, I first discovered yoga because of my dad. So when I grew up, I used to, I was sort of classified as a juvenile delinquent. So I got kicked out of, I think three schools, and I got sent to a group home where I lived for 2.5 years. I got kicked out of there too, but eventually they let me back, and I graduated a year late. And when I graduated, my dad had started practicing Ashtanga yoga, and he showed me his first teaching that he ever gave me was because I asked him, I said, what are you doing? Because he seemed so mellow. Like he seemed like he had totally transformed since the time I'd gone off to the group home, and he was way more relaxed, way more calm, way more grounded, felt more connected. His whole atmosphere, his energy, his attitude, he felt really peaceful and happy. And so I started to ask him. I said, what's going on? What are you doing? He's like, well, I'm practicing yoga. And I said, well, what is yoga? And he said
Good
he gave me
question.
the first. He has a great question.
Yeah.
He gave me the first teaching, and he said, just breathe. And I said, well, I'm always breathing. What are you talking about? And he said, but how often are you paying attention to your breath? And I thought about it, and I was like, wow, I've never really slowed down and watched my breath. So I took a deep breath. We took a deep breath together. And then I kept inquiring and asking him more. I said, well, tell me more about this yoga. I'm really fascinated and interested, because he never pushed it on me.
Mm.
It was like through attraction, through his, just like the quality of his being was really like, it kind of lit something inside me. I became really curious and interested. So it was really through his example, and then he just showed me. I think he showed me like Janu Shirsasana A, and I did that. It was my first stretch, and we did it in the living room. And he taught me some of the Ujjayi breath. And then he said, why go to this regular Mysore practice on Tuesday nights? And if you want, you're happy to come. Nobody's teaching, but you can just watch and follow along. And so I ended up going to the Mysore class, and it was my dad and a couple of his friends, all working class guys, carpenters, and um, one of the there was one lady who, she was a baker. She had a bakery, and it was just like a small group of people doing first and second series. And I remember the first time I touched the mat, and I just started to follow along, and it was one of the most challenging things I'd ever done that first practice. But when I hit that first shavasana, I just felt all my suffering for one shining moment. Like, because I
Mm.
was going through depression and anxiety, and I was having a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah, yeah,
stress and addictions
yeah.
and all kinds of stuff going on. And that first shavasana, it all vanished. It all
It's weird, isn't
disappeared.
it? I mean, I had the same experience. Like, I'd done martial arts and all kinds of. I was a gym beforehand and all this stuff. But the first class, and it was just hatha yoga. I wasn't even. I didn't even start Ashtanga. It was like in a basic hatha yoga class. I remember just doing a forward fold and just thinking, this is the most painful thing I've ever experienced, you know. But as you say, when you finish and you lie down, and it's like, oh my, you know, you never had that experience, even whatever you did when you were younger. So, and I still to this day don't really, I'm still trying to understand why, like why it works in that manner, you know, like just to try and rationalize it out. I mean, we know it does work, you know, we had that experience, but why is it that it works like that, you know? And as you mentioned, with all the,
I have a
you have a
sense,
theory.
like,
Yeah.
I have a sense, I have a feeling. It's because in the absence of all desire, there's peace. And
But why
it's
does it
not
work
a,
physically like that? Then it was it's a bigger rabbit hole, and I also have my ideas, but you know, we can't go into them now. We have a lot to talk about. But did you did you have also a drug problem? You said, because I mean I came from it. I
yeah,
mean,
it's,
really one major reason I came to it, to be honest, was I was maybe 19, 20, and already I had a really bad alcohol. Problem, you know, like, and it was
yeah.
okay when you're young, you know, it's all a bit of fun, you know, but I was drinking all the time, and I knew that something had to change, you know, because it wasn't going to be fun in 5, 10 years, you know. So it was really partly to break that, and to and
Mhm.
it also to break what was behind it, which was a chronic anxiety condition, what I had.
Well, that's so interesting. What's behind the addiction? Because what drives it? It's desire. Really is the fuel for the fire of our suffering. Like when I feel like I really want something, I feel like I am very uncomfortable. Like I feel like I'm outside of myself. I feel like I'm trying, I'm struggling, I'm in my thoughts, I'm in my emotions. I'm usually disconnected from my body. I'm not paying attention to my breath. I'm either in the future or the past. So I'm lost in the weeds of my mind. And
Mm,
the whole thrust, the whole point and purpose of the practice, as I understand it, is to not identify with the fluctuating waves of the mind, to be able to be established as the seer, as the Purusha, as the Atman, which has no thoughts, no emotions, never changes, is always still, ever present, pure, unbroken, non judgmental, loving kind awareness, which is shining through everyone's eyes all the time. It's always here. And I think when we resolve in Shavasana after going through all the gestures of the postures, which is really a full body, especially primary series, like a full body therapeutic,
mm.
uh, you're really touching every inch of your body, mind, and psyche, and your heart. Everything's getting integrated, and especially with the
Yeah, it's
breath, you're
pretty rigorous. Yeah, as
yeah,
a
and
as a
you're
form of
like
training.
and it demands your attention. It's so challenging that you have to be present.
That's
Um,
it.
and so shavasana, then all that maximum effort, and then you have that maximum surrender, that ishvara pranidhan, like just letting it all go, giving it all back to spirit, back to source. And I think that's the piece in shavasana, and I think that's why I got hooked, because I do have an addictive nature, because because I still identify with my mind, so that's the root of all addiction. So when I first did that shavasana with my dad, it was like there was no turning back. All I want
Yeah,
every day for the rest of my life, I want to know everything I can possibly know about yoga, and that began my quest, which was my question: what is yoga?
that
And
was
then
lucky to have your dad introduce you like that. You know, my dad played a bit of
very
squash, but
lucky.
I mean, nothing like that. You know, that wasn't really that helpful. You know, and a cricket. You know, in England, he played a bit of cricket. I remember. But again, you know, like not exactly yoga, is it? You know what? Like with your background like that, and you come from the background, maybe you want to talk, maybe you don't want to talk more about it, but I found it interesting. It was a punky about rap. You know, you were into some, you know, marginal kind of underground kind of, as you say, delinquent activities with the graffiti, getting arrested, doing graffiti and stuff like this. And
Mhm.
when you came to the yoga, did it mark a great like stop or schism, you know, between that background and a new background, or did you try and relate your younger experiences to what you were experiencing in yoga? You know, how did they go together, or was it
So
just a cut and change?
that was a threshold that I crossed, but
Yeah.
it began the process of integration. So everything that happens in life as I see it is a part. It's a process. We're who I am is a process. Like my body, my mind, my emotions. That's all a process. It's never ending. It's always evolving, changing. I'm going through the waves of the gunas. Nature is fluctuating and happening. But the process of softening back into the self, back into the seer, back into awareness, it's that began my journey back in to be recognizing that I am awareness. I am not everything. I am not nature. I am the dreamer who's experiencing the dream. I am the seer who's seeing the scene, and be just tasting that and touching that, and that recognition and that remembrance that I, you, all of us are that divine spark shining in the center of our life. That helped me to really shift the trajectory of my life. So instead of going outward, now I'm bending back inward. And as the senses start to slide back in, pratyahara, like drawing everything back into the shell and being inside our being, it's a magical process where a lot of things start to unfold that it's hard to explain, the shift, the healing, and the transformation that happens in that really deep space. And
Mm.
so I the word that I feel really encapsulates it the most, because I'm a devotee and a follower of Neem Karoli Baba Maharaji,
Hmm.
um, is this word grace. And word grace is something that happens to us that is beyond our own effort. It's like we don't earn it, we don't deserve it, we don't do something to gain it, but through grace, it happens. And the practice helps to prime us so that we can be open and receptive to experience the grace, of the self, of the guru. There's an old saying in India: God, guru, and self are one.
Mm.
When all of those folds collapse back into being, we can see that there's only one here, but we're still separate, we're still individuals. So we're having to navigate that beautiful balance of just being aware of our separateness but not identifying with it.
And on the note of Neem Karoli, and I believe you had Krishna Das on your recording with you sometimes, right? We've had him on the podcast,
Yeah,
and yeah,
yeah.
that's
KD,
cool to have him on your records as well, like that.
I'm
So
very
I mean,
grateful
I
to
know that you
Krishna.
had in your early experiences, though, you still had some some kind of spiritual experiences when you were young. In
Yeah,
the midst of other
yeah.
things, and do
Well,
you feel?
we're always in
Yeah, did you feel
spiritual
you were
experience.
always trying to work things out? Was there always that
Yeah,
sense of? Because I mean, for
I
me,
think
I mean,
that's
I
why.
can remember very young. I was questioning from the start, even though I was getting
Mm,
into
mm.
not necessarily helpful activities. There was still underneath all my bad activities. There was a questioning of what's going on here. Like which was
Did you
promoting. Yeah,
did you always have the sense growing up that something wasn't quite right? Like
yeah.
something's kind of
Yeah, yeah, me, yeah, for sure. I mean,
something's kind of off.
I suppose it just seemed that everyone else was just getting along, and for me, everything was just kind of felt like really like really strange, like like everyone was kind of accepting reality, and for me, it was just like everything just was felt like super normal. Like I mean, like what's going on here? It was almost mundane, but also bizarre at the same time. So
Yeah,
I felt
yeah, I
ensconced. I felt
understand.
a difference from peers who just seemed to unquestionably accept and just assume that this reality was the way it was. But for me, well, one, that wasn't adequate, and two, I was just
Mm.
for some reason I had this question: well, what am I doing here? And and then actually, due to my dad, I found these. I always say this: these Carlos Castaneda books. The Carlos Castaneda Tales of
Yeah,
Power, and and he had a few of those books on their bookshelf for some reason from his hippie days. And I started to
interesting.
read those, and that was because where I'm from, we didn't have any religion anymore, or nothing was there. Nothing was there at all, to be honest. Like there was no ideas of anything other. And
So
so when I saw
you didn't watch Star Wars growing up? You didn't see Return of the
I did,
Jedi or
yeah, but it didn't relate. I was never interested in this kind of what I saw as like was kind of, how do you call it, science fiction. Like it didn't relate to me in a spiritual quest. This just seemed to be like movies. But when I read those books, I thought, well, maybe there's something other in consciousness. Maybe there's something where I could resolve this consciousness to feel a bit better. To
Mm,
feel a bit more like in touch with itself, or that there's something
mm.
more to gain. So
So
yeah, that was.
you said it wasn't adequate. So if it's not adequate, you ought to quit.
Yeah, I mean, that didn't come until I didn't feel that way. I mean, I try to toe the line as
No,
much as
I
possible,
totally
but
relate. I'm just playing with words, but
I think
I totally understand the feeling because I had that same sentiment growing up that something felt like not right. Like on the surface, everyone was going along with everything, but it felt like there was something more. there was something missing. There was something that I wasn't quite, I wasn't getting it through school. I wasn't getting it through religion. I love and appreciate and respect my family, but it was just something bigger and something deeper, something beyond what was being presented to me in the external world. And so I always had that hunger, that thirst, and that longing. I think we have that in common, that inquiry of like, what is it?
Yeah,
What,
yeah.
and of course in the yoga tradition we have great, amazing, luminaries like Ramana Maharshi, who has the yoga of self-inquiry, asking the question, who am I? The ultimate question that we can ponder in our lifetime and really excavate and examine and investigate. And I think that's what the yoga practice is so powerful at. It's taking the raw material, the substance that we're born with, our body, our blood, our breath, our lungs, our heart, our eyes, our senses, our thoughts, our emotions, and cooking all of that, using all of that to really move into that process of the practice and to discover what is shining in the center of my life. What is it that is still, that never changes, that is always the same, that's always been here? And when I dive into it, I feel, words, words are inadequate, but the word awareness seems like it is pointing me in the right direction. Becoming, aware of who is having the thoughts, who is feeling the feelings, becoming aware of nature, how everything is sort of miraculously happening right now in the present moment. The planets are turning, the waves are rolling, the wind is blowing, the heart is beating, our wounds are healing, our eyes are blinking. There's so much happening right now, like automagically, it's just happening. And I'm curious,
Mm.
like, what is the power, the force, the energy, the spirit that is animating all this, and how does it relate to me? And how can I be in tune with it? How can I harmonize with it? How can I relax and rest into it so that it can flow and I can be in that stream? And what I'm realizing now, and I feel like I'm just a baby, but I'm realizing that the way to do it is just to relax. And I think
I
yoga
think,
just grabs us and like
yeah, I
works
think
us
that's
out so that we can relax.
I think that for so many people, like the yoga is such an obvious and tangible thing to get into because your daily experience of your body is so immediate. You don't need any introduction to that. Like you've got this immediate experience, and it's an easy way in. Which
Yeah, it's direct. Yeah.
it's so quick and direct, and as you say, and yeah, talk about that maybe, like the Larry, you did Larry Schultz's Rocket Yoga, and you had a unique relationship there. You were very fortunate to go
Yeah.
live in that and Larry's place, right? You had a little cubby hole, I think, a little cupboard
Yeah.
at the top of the studio, and you had Larry, like personal time with Larry for a great deal of time, right? So maybe just tell people how you experienced the Rocket Yoga, and how was Larry, because he's
Mhm.
obviously a super charismatic figure, but he died too young, and I think people don't know enough about him as well. Eh?
Well, so after I climbed out of that first shavasana feeling completely filled with euphoric, ecstatic bliss, like for the first time, I was hooked. I'm on a quest. So now I start showing
Mm.
up to practice. And then my dad says, if you want, I can take you to my teacher who's in the city and we can go to the class together. So I was like, let's go, man. Because my dad had a huge stack of yoga books, and I just started devouring them. I started getting into meditation. I started looking into all these different gurus, and I really made it my, I shaved my head. I was living, I kind of like became like a monk, like I just wanted to be a yogi and practice yoga all the time and understand what that meant. So I went to the city with my dad and we rolled into class, and I step into this scene. It's kind of blowing my mind because I walk into this room and there's just all these amazing, um, beautiful people, like young, diverse. The room is hot. There's music playing before class. It's on the second story, so it's overlooking the San Francisco Bay. And then Larry kind of strolls in like, I want to say like a jungle cat. Like he just kind of got a little strut, like he just walking in like with swagger. And I was like, man, this guy is so cool. And Larry and my dad were really, they're like best friends. So Larry was like my uncle. So, but I didn't really meet Larry because I was in the group home. So when my dad took me in, it was like just instant like connection. It was like meeting someone who you'd been related to for a long time, that you're just getting reunited. So Larry and I, he, like you're saying, he took me under his wing. He became my
Mm.
mentor, and the thing about Larry that was so magnetic and so amazing was that he just loved yoga. He loved the practice, he loved teaching, he loved everything about it, and he exuded this natural enthusiasm, which was really infectious. Like, it was fun. It was fun to be around. He was laughing. He knew everybody. Like, all the homeless guys on the street knew him, and he was cool with everyone. He had, at that time, weed was still illegal, but Larry always had a huge joint. So, but he never smoked before he taught. He always smoked after class, and he just had this this cosmic cloud around him. And he was kind of Larry was very much a mystic, in the sense that he was a wild shamanic guy, but he was also a seer. And every once in a while he would just flash and say something out of the blue, and it would kind of strike you like lightning and stop you in your tracks, and you would kind of crack when you heard it. And I had many experiences where Larry would just say something out of the blue. I remember one time very specifically, because once I met Larry, it was like getting on the train. Like, I lived at the studio. I traveled with him. I was his gopher. He'd send me on, go for this, go for that. I'd go get him coffee. And one time he was talking to a friend, and his friend was giving him a hard time about Ashtanga yoga, saying, you can't really call this Ashtanga yoga. This is not the traditional sequence. And Larry looked at him and he says, you don't exist. I don't exist. Patabi Joyce doesn't exist. Ashtanga yoga doesn't exist. Only God exists. And the guy just looked at him and he was dumbfounded. He didn't know what to say. And it was like cold water being splashed in his face. And I was in the room, and I just heard it out of the corner of my ear. And I kind of looked over, and I was like, it was like a gust of wind blew through the room. And I was like, whoa, what did he just say? And Larry had that sort of vision where he was able to see through the facade, the surface. He had that psychedelic vision where he could see beyond just what everybody was doing. He had that mystic vision. He was able to see into the other side, and it was really, he had an electric presence. And he was wild and crazy and unpredictable, but he was amazing. And I was so lucky to be able to spend time with him, and I feel like he never left. He just
Yeah.
changed forms. He just changed
Mm.
forms, man.
Did you know Rima Data? Do you know her?
Yeah,
She
yeah, I'm
because
friends
she
with Rima.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I had
Rima's
her on the
awesome.
podcast recently, and
Yeah,
she
she's
she worked with
amazing.
Larry, and yeah, yeah, yeah. Good. Well, Larry mentioned, and you mentioned that Batabi Joyce was, well, Larry was saying was his teacher or even his guru. I mean, but we know that
Mhm.
Larry kind of did his own thing with the rocket yoga, but he still
Yeah,
felt that Batabi Joyce was his teacher, right? But he was
he
amending the
still
forms,
had
as I believe. Yeah.
no, he Larry always carried a tremendous amount of respect for the tradition and for Guruji, and um, I think he just felt like, because he started teaching to the Grateful Dead, and he tried teaching Mysore to the
Mm.
Grateful Dead, and they just weren't having it. And so that's where the rocket developed. Was he decided to mix up the practice. It seemed like divine inspiration, to be honest, because the way that he brought those postures together, like, he really took his time, and he studied, and he developed a form of the practice that it just made sense for modern people. It was fun, it was engaging, it was strong. It wasn't the same all the time, and he also wasn't teaching traditional Mysore, which is, you didn't have to go to him to get the next posture. And I think he really wanted to open it up and make it more accessible, so that it didn't rely just
Right.
on
So
him.
so also there's Mysore is there. He was teaching a Mysore, but there was a bit more free, right?
As far as I know, the way that the rocket there may have been Mysore at the studio when I was going. I remember specifically, and there was amazing teachers came through It's Yoga in San Francisco, and I was so lucky because I got to practice with Tim Miller. I got to practice with Mati and Chuck Miller
Mm.
and Mati Ezrati. I got to practice with, of course, I mean, over the years, I've had amazing, amazing opportunities. Sharon Gannon and David Life, Dharma Mitra, just so many incredible teachers. I just count my blessings because I've been really, really, truly blessed to be able to spend time with incredible, amazing teachers. Um, but Larry was the one that introduced me to a lot of them. And There was definitely primary series being taught. There was modified primary being taught, and then there was rocket. I don't know that there was a traditional Mysore program as far as I can remember.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of pedestrian question about rocket, really. I should do my homework and learn more about the rocket sequences. But I do know that it was Bob Weir, wasn't it, of the Grateful Dead, that,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
came up with the name Rocket Yoga. I'd heard that before,
yeah.
Uh, yeah, what a claim to fame. But I think and there must. I mean, I have to look at the series more clearly, but they must be enduringly good, because they stand the test of time, don't they? Up to this
Well, they
day, Rocket
really
is popular. I actually feel in a way that, as I said to you before we started, the Rocket is actually getting more popular again as people become, the censorious and the litigious nature of Ashtanga as it become increasingly particular with details and controlling people's experience. The freedom of Rocket and the trying out of different arm balances and stuff. I think is appealing to people, and I think you still get
well
the flow and the
this
repetition, but yeah.
and the spirit of that goes through and beyond because it really opened up the gates for the more modern vinyasa yoga practice because Larry was one of the early people to really adapt and modify and break out of the set sequence,
Mm,
and that
mm.
really did pave the way for vinyasa yoga. I don't know that a lot of people. I mean, there are other people who helped do that as well, but Larry was
Yeah,
one of the
there's
early
a
pioneers of that.
yeah. I never thought of it that way. There's definitely a few people around that time. I mean, like, did he know Brian Kest, for example? Did Larry have any
Yeah,
relationship with Brian? Yeah,
Larry knew everybody because the scene was really small. Like
yeah, of course,
when we
yeah,
started practicing yoga in the '90s, it was kind of a ragtag bunch of people, and it was like surfers, and in the city, it was like the internet boom was just happening in San Francisco, so there was a lot of young people, and there was a lot of energy and activity, and I remember like if you wanted to go online, you'd go to an internet cafe. Back in those
yeah.
days, you had your
Back in the
flip
day,
phones, and
yeah. And then
yeah,
you get
and you'd
hacked
show
because
us
you
the
hadn't
CD.
closed your email or
Yeah.
something. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Oh
it
yes,
was a fun time, and actually at that
yeah.
time in San Francisco was an explosion of graffiti. So I was
Mm,
kind of in the right place at the right time in the right state of mind for just a whole bunch of there was all kinds of cultures colliding. So the Bay Area has been my brother, who's also named Adam. He's an amazing DJ, and the turntable movement in the Bay Area was like one of the biggest DJ capitals of the world in terms of
hmm.
people who were innovating scratch and turntable techniques and electronic music, down tempo music, house music, dub music, like everything was happening at that time, late
Mm.
90s, early 2000s. And yoga was just starting to catch on in terms of like a subculture. People were getting more interested in it. But, in those early days, it was rare to find a yoga studio. It was rare to find other people who practice yoga.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You had to really look for it.
They have to try. Now he's just trying to avoid them. You can't bloody
Yeah.
avoid them. But and no, everyone's like, oh, your hairdresser. Oh yeah, I've done a TT as well. I teach on the side. And you just can't avoid it, can you? But yeah, at the time, I mean, I just stumbled into it because I just happened to have. There was an Ashtanga teacher in the small town I was living in that when I was doing university. But that
What
was
Adam? What year
pure
was that
luck.
you started?
As you say, it was a 99 or something in the 90s, the late 90s,
Mhm.
So, and at that time, as you point out rightly, it was that I think what I want to remind people of that come later is that it was a kind of counterculture vibe around it. Like
Yeah,
people that were
yeah.
there, they were alternative minded. Now it's like very much the opposite in a way. If you don't do yoga, you're alternative minded, It's like, but then it was like you were surrounded by people really doing different things with their life. There were people that wanted to
Yeah, a
make a
lot of
statement and do
artists.
something different. Yeah, so
Yeah.
not to say that the clientele or the people that are practicing is any worse now, but there was just a different vibe around it, and people, as you say, very much interrelating the yoga asana with movements like KC, Krishna consciousness, or
Mhm.
the graffiti or punk music. Punk was big in
Yeah,
Ashtanga. Yeah, it's like
it was very much like the skate culture or BMX
yeah,
culture or
yeah,
surf
yeah.
culture. It was like
Surfers. Yeah.
in the early days, it was really a small group of really devoted people who were really sincere, and they weren't really doing it because of money or anything like that. Just they really genuinely loved the practice, and it was a community. And of course, that gave rise to some amazing teachers. And I think it was a little. I don't know, maybe I'm making this up, but my perception was it was like a little tougher and a little stronger. Like people were a little more hardcore. Um,
For sure. Yeah, 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 for
yeah.
sure. I mean, there's people doing all kinds of crazy stuff, practicing for 4 or 5 hours twice a day,
Yeah.
and
I talk
all
about in
kinds.
my
Yeah.
book, there was, if I don't know if you remember this part, but there was a guy who used to come to the studio. God bless him. He was a cool guy, but he had his headphones on and he had Slayer written on his
Oh
Mac.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And he would just
I
do
do remember that
practice.
part. Yeah,
He
yeah,
would do class after class after class and never do shavasana. So he would just go through right into the next class, and he'd do like 2 or 3 classes in a row. And he would just sometimes do his own thing, completely ignore the teacher. He's always in the corner, and like he had headphones on during class, so he was listening to like heavy metal and to talk about hardcore. And then I asked Larry one day. I said, "Yo, what's that guy doing over there?" And he's like, "Oh, he's fine. Let him do his thing. He's getting off heroin."
yeah,
So it's like he had that nature where he accepted and allowed everyone to do what they needed to do.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
wasn't it didn't being around Larry wasn't like a judgmental vibe. It wasn't a heavy trip. It was like, come do your practice. And he was just there. He was like, he was like the mayor of South of Market, San Francisco, which was a grimy neighborhood. There's a lot of drug addicts, a lot of crime, a lot of stuff happening in that area. It's changed a lot now. It's still kind of bad, but it was just like it was an amazing little sanctuary and place where people could come from
yeah,
all
yeah.
around and find some peace in the middle of the city.
I would have loved to have met him. I mean, I knew quite well Matty Ratty. I knew, so she used to
Mhm.
talk about him a lot,
Yeah,
and
God
how
bless him.
what a character he was. So yeah, I would have
Oh,
loved to have
they used to
loved to.
get into it, those 2.
I'm sure they would, because Maddie was
Yeah.
pretty. She was pretty
Yeah,
full on as well. So them
yeah,
two
Mate's a
together would have been
firecracker.
an amazing party. Like if you had
Yeah, it
them
was
two in a
fun,
class
man.
teaching together, wow, what a class! But yeah, I mean, I think without sentimentalizing the good old days, there was definitely a feeling of like catharsis and healing in the
Mhm.
class when we started. And people were crazy. Like just encouraged to push themselves as hard as they could and kind of sweat out the pain and trauma kind of thing. At least I was, and I
Yeah,
think, but
and
I think there
Larry
was a lot of others around us doing the same, and we were all just wearing underpants or swimming shorts at
yeah,
best,
just
like
wear
bicycle
sweatpants, yeah.
shorts or swim shorts, and you
Well,
just had a towel. They
they
had
didn't
no
really have
yoga clothes. There
yoga
was no
clothes
yoga
back
clothes.
then, yeah.
Just yeah, and you have a beach towel on the floor, just soaking with sweat, and everyone was just there's a pushing kind of vibe of just kind of like, let's just get it out and cleanse ourselves. Whereas today
Yeah,
it's sanitized in many ways, and of course there's good and bad, because I mean, there was
yeah,
people being pushed to the point of crippling themselves, and
yep,
now I think
yep.
there's a lot of more understanding about anatomy and safety and all that stuff, which is good as well, and
And I think, yeah, well, everything has essentially 3 qualities, which we learned from yoga. Everything is essentially good, everything is essentially bad, and everything is essentially neutral. So dark, light, and mixed. And everything has those 3 qualities, those 3 gunas. And one of the things I loved about Larry is what I think he understood, that a lot of people were getting hurt with the adjustments and stuff. And I think that's why he had his policy was like, you never push or impose yourself onto someone
mm,
else's body like that. So he was really aware of that, like early on. Um, and he just had in San Francisco, back in the day, was also had a really accepting vibe. Like there was a feeling of, a lot of artistic, creative people and kind of counterculture, subculture, and there was just a real feeling of just yeah, acceptance. People
mm,
could be weird, whatever.
mm.
It's cool. Just we're all here to do the practice. We have that in common. Um, but yeah, yeah, it's interesting, man. It's interesting to
What about
reflect on.
your time in Mysore? Because I didn't even know that you were really in Ashtanga in such a way. I mean, I think actually, to be honest, I should have expected it, because I think Nancy Gilgoff gave me a tape or something like that. She liked your
Oh,
music,
cool.
so
Oh,
there must
thanks.
have been some
Same.
connection there. So I would have inferred it from there. But yeah, I mean, you went to Mysore and you practiced with Batabi Joyce. Well, actually, I think you also practiced with Venkatesh, you said in the book. But your
Yep.
first
Yeah.
experience of the concert, which I wanted to get round to, the music, of course, is in many people know Ganesh from Mysore and Anu's house, his wife, and
Mhm.
him, and your first ever concert was actually for
On the
yogis, for
rooftop. Yeah.
aspiring yogis, at Ganesh's place, right, at Anu's house. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, MC Yogi was born on that rooftop in India. The name had come to me one day when I was doing a self practice, and I thought I don't know where it came from. I had been scribbling some rhymes, and because I've always been into poetry, and maybe at some point I could share some lyrics or some verses too.
Yeah, yeah. Please do. Anytime,
Um,
just break out.
and so I was doing my self practice, and I was in shavasana, and this name just came in, and it was like MC Yogi, and I was like, oh, perfect, the most dumb generic name possible. So let's just go with that. So that kind of stuck, and then that concert at the top of on the rooftop, that was the first time I'd ever performed these songs that I was writing. Okay, so a little verse. I just wrote a couple things. I write every day. My
Do
practice
you?
is I just like to write. So I wrote this composition and a composition. I just like to play with words
Mm-hmm.
and look at what is the different way to work with words, because words create worlds, and words can be just like the gunas. They could be good, they could be bad, or they could be neutral. And oftentimes it's how we charge the word. So you can say something that could come across as really negative, like if I'm just messing around with my brother or my sister, but it's coming from a place of love. Or you can say something that feels like very positive and nice and shiny, but it's actually coming from not a good place.
Mm.
So the intention, like what the energy that we give to words, I think that's why, like in the yoga tradition, like there's so much emphasis on bringing attention and awareness to syllables when you're chanting mantras, and Sanskrit is such a powerful language that it carries a lot of intention inside of it if you know what it represents. Um, and so when I'm writing, a lot of the rhymes and a lot of the things that I write, it's really it's a way for me to focus and direct my monkey mind. It's a way to really, it's sort of like a practice for my thoughts, like really putting
Mm.
my thoughts into postures, and getting the words to interlock so that they rhyme and flow and stream together like a vinyasa, essentially. Like, so I've been working on this song. It's called Practice Makes Progress. I let go of the outcome and stay focused on the process. The road we travel is not made of gravel, dust, dirt, rock, concrete, or even asphalt. It's more subtle, traveling through subtle tunnels, away from the external surface, world of the ego. 10,000 candles lit from one wick, raise a lantern quick, traveling through the labyrinth. Escape the erratic, moving back toward the ecstatic. Ecstasy, exit toward the sea, shake off the shadow and the shackles trying to tackle me, feel the chain. Sliding off my brain, pressure drops like rain, feel it spiral down the drain. Freedom is a feeling when the ceiling is open, when the mind wanders, bring it back again and again. Stay focused. So I take like words and I construct them, and I make it my habit, because our habits create our habitat. So it becomes my habitual ritual of just constructing and shaping and hammering words, and melting them down until they flow like a river.
That was good. I mean, I liked it. Yeah, I had a good flow to it. Yeah, for sure. I mean, but what I want to say there, and what was going through my head there is, well, the words were good, but how? I mean, do you remember all those things? If you've got like 20 songs like that, how would you possibly
Oh,
remember?
there's more than 20.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like
like say you
my
do a concert, and you've got like a
yeah.
whole like playlist. Are you looking at the screen, or do you just remember them by
So
heart?
the
Because
interesting
that's a
thing
yoga
is, like,
practice itself.
I don't know if it's called a mnemonic device. I'm not quite sure,
Right.
but when you're chanting, or when you're rhyming, or when you're rapping, or when you're reciting and you're rocking, so it's a somatic movement as well. It's a part of the neural net. Like, it's in the body, it's in the brain. It's it gets programmed into the software, the folds of the fabric. So it's like you see the images of Hanuman chanting Ram, and when he tears open his chest to reveal Sita and Ram shining like a blazing sun inside the center of his heart, it's said that the onlookers who witnessed that dazzling spectacle of Hanuman revealing his truth, they saw that along every sort of tissue, every sinew, every fiber, every organ, every bone was tattooed the name of his beloved, Ram, 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 Ram. So his whole being was exuding his mantra, because he became so absorbed, so concentrated, and so drenched, so soaking wet in the spirit of his prayer, of his mantra, that his whole being would exude that vibration and that sound. So when I do my rhymes, like temple light never flickers and it never fades, never dies, never wavers, never blows away, untouched by the wind, rain beyond pain. Feel the light shining bright inside the rib cage. To enter the central innermost chamber, sacrifice my pride, let go of all my anger, let it all go. Let myself be humble, moving through the inner eye of the needle. See the light that shines through the keyhole, pierce or not, turn the lock, enter the temple. The mental is the essential temple, the cerebral cathedral. So the words, they're in me. Like I can't even get rid of them. It's like they've crystallized inside my mind because I've worked so deeply on like imprinting them and like carving them and crafting them and sculpting them until they're constructed. They're like a, it's just like a sonic prayer, and I can access that just by actually really just by relaxing. The more I relax, the more I remember them. So it's interesting. It's like I imagine the practice like when you do a lot of postures for a long time and do a lot of pranayama, a lot of scriptural study and everything like that. It does it, and I believe I read this somewhere that every ounce of practice, even a tiny drop of practice, will never leave you. You will always have the benefit of any effort you put moving toward the self with a
Yeah,
capital
it's
L.
in the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah,
Yeah.
Krishna says
So
it. I
it's
think
there.
chapter 4 or 5. Yeah, nothing will be
Ah,
lost. Yeah, in
nice.
this life or the next. Um,
Amazing.
yeah, that's wonderful. So when you go into that, it's like actually, it's like suddenly a completely different break to the interview. And when you're doing that, it just the energy changes. And I can see like just some sense of something which is deeper, which is there's something coming through there. I mean, I like it a lot. I mean, because it's so
It's
focused,
it's
and
it's very
I mean, you don't.
relaxing, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say, is it relaxing when you're doing it? Because are you
Oh,
aware
it's
of the
like
are you aware of the crowd, and how does that relate to you and the crowd? Because it's so innerly focused that it doesn't
sometimes
seem.
I
Yeah,
lose, sometimes I get lost and I don't see anybody. Just I'm in articulating the words and the awareness around the voice and the words where everything else disappears. Um, so like I got one just coming up now is like dancing in the sun rays blaze from the one, return to the point where the light comes from, succumb to the pool drawn in like my tongue, like undulating waves lap across the ocean, melt the mind so I'm no longer none, king to come for those who don't fight, ever crumb flung back into the space from which we all sprung. When my work is done, I'll be dancing in the sun. So like when I go into that, it's like ripples or waves, so it's the cadence of the syllables,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I think it represents the waves of the mind. And when I can see the waves of the mind, I can observe and be aware of it. And as the witness, as the awareness itself, I can just let it flow. And so I'm aware that I'm doing it, but it's just kind of happening.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
It's just kind of
that's
happening.
that's what I say when there's something there. I could see you're kind of going into a different state, and you have to. I mean, it's like I used to think I had a good memory, and I used to try and remember off by heart certain
You know who
Upanishads
has
and
the
stuff.
you
But
know
that's
who has the
incredible.
best you know who has the best memory?
Tell me.
You. Do you know the you I'm referring to?
No.
The spirit.
Oh right, okay.
Because
Did you get it?
so it's
Because
all there.
it's coming
It's
through
all
you,
there.
as you say. It's coming through you,
Yeah,
isn't
it's
it? Yeah, 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 yeah. Right.
spirit knows everything, is all loving, all present,
So,
never changes. And so
along those
just
lines,
resting
then,
in that.
what's the best lyrics that the spirits ever told you? What's your favorite lyrics that you've ever come through you?
Oh,
You
the
must,
fairest
yeah,
lyrics that
yeah, the best
that
stuff that
I've worked
you've
on.
you feel like you've channeled, as it were.
Oh
Yeah,
wow. I mean
I'm
there's
sure there's
catalogs. I mean,
something
well
must come to your head.
in the early days, like when I first started writing in my late teens when I
Mm.
first started practicing. So in those early days, there were some songs like "At the base of the spine is the root of the ground, Muladhara chakra, the bija mantra or sound is Lam, color red, and the element is earth, ground, floor, and support of the whole universe. Second wheel is in the center of the hips, Swadhisthana chakra, which represents relationship. The mantra is Vam, and orange is the hue. Water is the element which makes it all move. Third wheel is in the solar plexus, Manipura chakra. The mantra to bless this is Ram, color yellow, shining brighter than the sun. The element is fire, which fuels digestion. Fourth wheel is in the center of the chest, Anahata chakra. The key is the breath. The mantra is Yam, to bring love, melt fear. The color is green, and the element is air. Fifth wheel represents communication, Vishuddha chakra, sky blue, purification. Say Hum to generate a blessing. And so I started to memorize the chakras, and I started to write these rhymes as a way to teach myself. So the sixth wheel is known as the
That's
third
too good,
eye,
mate.
Ajna chakra, which is the color of the night sky.
Yeah.
The mantra is the most sacred syllable Om. When it's heard, the word helps to clear the dome. Seventh wheel sits just like a crown. Sahasvara chakra, pure light shining down. 1,000 petal lotus which slowly unfolds, uniting individuals with the supreme soul. 7 prayer wheels spin inside the subtle body along the midline known as Shishuna Nadi, Ida and Pingala regulating both sides, breathing through the nostrils to balance the mind. Coiled 3 times at the base of the spine, Kundalini slumbers till it wakes and climbs up the radiant gradient from dark to light, moving from impermanence to eternal life. So it's all just a way for me to teach myself and remember what the symbols
That
and
is
the
insane.
elements
Yeah.
and the mantras of the chakras were. So in the beginning, when I really started writing it was really just for me to learn. Is that and then people heard it and they were like, "Oh, you should share it." And I was like, "Okay." But in the beginning it was really just for me, just
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
was
Well,
really
yeah.
yeah,
Well, see, music's like an education in yoga
yeah.
philosophy. But for any, I mean, especially for anyone
Well,
kind
it's
of,
like
well, yeah. I
well,
mean,
it's
you're
probably
just,
yoga for dummies because it's
well, it's,
definitely
it's a good
the
entry. I
comic
mean,
book
at
version.
least, yeah. For anyone struggling to think that they, oh, I've memorized the chakras or the primary series postures. Come on, guys, get a grip. I mean, what you're what you're doing is insane. I mean, that is
No, don't get
incredible.
a grip. That's the whole point. Don't get a
Right,
grip.
just let it
Let
go.
it
Right, okay.
just let it go. Let it go. Let it all
Okay,
go.
segueing along from that, I mean, you know, you have a background in, you know, in regular, in what's that, regular music, and you know, non Indian music, non yoga music, you know, like, and a lot of it, as you said in your book, is it's a little bit more salubrious. Let's say, is talking a little bit more about,
Yeah,
uh,
it's a great word, man.
yeah,
Salubrious.
you know, kind of, yeah. You
What
put it
does
down in
that
the
mean?
song. Credit me. Uh, well,
What
you know,
does salubrious mean?
that's salubrious. I mean, it's kind of of a nature of questionable value.
Nice,
Let's say,
salubrious.
perhaps, yeah,
That's
yeah.
beautiful.
So let's say the questionable value of a certain hip hop stuff that, you know, that would have influenced you. I mean, you're rapping. You know, the background of rap is obviously it's about cars, women, drugs, killing people. You know, how do you square? How do you, you know, like, you know, and you grew up in a gritty background and you had some exposure to that, and
No,
then
I
how?
grew up in I grew up in the suburbs, man. I grew up on the outskirts of the city. Like it's I grew up at a time when hip hop was really, really, and I imagine in some ways it really still is. But I grew up at a time when hip hop was just absolutely beautiful. It was intelligent. It was sophisticated. There was amazing wordplay, incredible artists. You know, I grew up with Tribe Called Quest, Souls of Mischief, the BC Boys, Run DMC, KRS One. I grew up at a time when hip hop was really elevated, and a lot of people call it the golden era, the golden age of hip hop. And so, yeah, there was always that element of, you know, death and destruction, but that's in every form of music. Like heavy metal has that, you know, um, country music has songs about dying and getting killed and stuff. So it's a that's that there's that element because I think that comes with entertainment, like wanting to have things that are dramatic and that'll get your attention and yeah, and there's also like the flossiness and like the shiny, you know, materialism, but that's in every
Yeah, I
genre
suppose
as
what I was
well.
asking is what is it, what have been your influences? You know, but I guess you
Yeah,
just answered that in those particular
I think my
like
biggest
rap artists
influences,
that
if I
weren't too
was
edgy.
George
Really?
Harrison from the
Oh yeah,
Beatles.
right. Yeah,
Who was a devotee of Krishna.
yeah,
George Harrison's a huge influence. Um, the Beatles just in general, but you know, I grew up. You know, my early cassettes, man, when I was growing up, was like James Brown, Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, the Beach Boys. You know, Elvis. Just like I grew up like on American music, like
yeah.
real
It's
American
so
music. You know,
so American,
like
isn't
rock
it?
and
Yeah, yeah,
roll, jazz,
yeah.
just all of it, man. Like in my household, like my mom and my dad, like they all had so much good music. You know, I mean, it's I could go on for an
Yeah,
hour
yeah,
about
yeah.
just the influences
But
and
it's
just
funny though
different
because
artists.
we were talking beforehand, and he was asking my influences and the music I listened to, and it was exactly the same. Like my parents listened to the English versions of that, you know. So
Yeah.
not the Beach Boys, but we had the Stones, the Beatles, all the stuff that went along in the '60s in the UK. You know,
Oh, amazing! The
the
British
Kinks, the
invasion.
Faces,
The
Rod
Who.
Stewart,
Yeah.
you know, all the stuff that was there. You know, but it was completely English, and it was only later when you know, my parents, you know, being English, were never really that much drew to the American stuff in England. You know, like there wasn't really that much crossover. I'm trying to think. You know, I mean, maybe a little
Well,
bit
there was
Elvis,
a
but not
there was
much, you know. I
but
mean, the
there's a
Beach
there
Boys
was a
certainly not. That was something
There was
that came to
that
myself.
was
For
very
example,
California.
like yeah, great harmonies. I
And the
mean, incredible
Doors, big
musicians.
fan of the
Yeah,
Doors.
the
But there was
Doors.
always,
Yeah.
music is always like, I know that like the British invasion was deeply influenced by like Southern blues, and
For sure. Yeah, the
there's
Stones.
always
Yeah, especially.
music is always a confluence of so many influences, and everyone is influencing everybody else. So it's like a huge tributary where all these rivers are streaming into this ocean of popular music. And growing up, I was just surrounded in this sea of just amazing art and amazing music, especially in the Bay Area. Um, so many great bands came out of here. I mean, the Grateful Dead came out of here. That's, Larry was
Did they?
connected
But
to
I
the
in
Dead.
San Francisco, were they? I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
just actually not far from where I live,
Oh wow, I love Jim
um,
Morrison. Yeah,
and just the whole psychedelic movement
yeah.
was really big. And then yeah,
I had the
it's
Beats as well. The Beats from San Francisco, right? Kerouac, and before that, you had some
yeah,
beat
exactly.
poetry.
Yep,
Ginsberg,
City
Kerouac,
Lights,
Burroughs, all
and
this stuff.
a lot of
Yeah,
influence, a lot of Buddhist influence.
yeah.
San Francisco has always been a huge gateway for Asia, Asian culture.
Yeah.
Angel Island, which is close to San Francisco, was the Ellis Island of people immigrating from Asia, China,
Uh-huh.
Japan. Um, I grew up with around like a lot of like, a lot of my friends growing up were Palestinian, and I had a lot of Jewish friends, Christian friends. Buddha, one of my best friends was, from Laos, so Buddhist, and it's just always like a mix, just like a bunch of. And the one thing that we always had in common with my group of friends, like because I ran with a bunch of different crews, is the music was like the anchor. So at that time, like breakdancing, graffiti, freestyling, emceeing, um, DJing, like putting on parties, like
Hmm.
that was really happening. And it was a really fun time to grow up because people were really creative and they were innovative. Um, and so yeah, that was definitely just when we grew up, it was just a really exciting time to
Yeah.
be in California.
I think you're in the right place at the right time in many respects. I think Um, Yeah,
Mm.
what about the beats then? I mean, what do you like? It's clear that you're
Yeah.
writing first. It seems to me like you're writing first and then putting the beats on later. Which, first of all, I think you are using some beats that, and then now you're making your beats for a long time. You've been making your beats, I think.
Hmm.
What kind of influences, like now, what kind of modern influences? Let's just kind of dovetail two different questions as we draw to the end of our chat here.
Yeah.
Modern influences on your beats. How do you square the music with the beats, and what are your modern influences on the rhythms that you put together?
Everything is a collage. Everything is a mess. Everything is chaos. Everything is confusion. Everything is a swirling s- space filled with dust and planets and stars and comets and nebula, and it's all just spiraling and spinning. And then I look at a flashing thing, and I see a flashing thing, and I see something over there. I see a jewel. I pick up a gem. I look at the flower. My wife says something. I walk outside. The antenna's up. I hear someone talking. um, and then it all kind of falls in to this basket or this bowl or this pot. And then I start breathing, and it just starts cooking, and it starts stewing, and it starts growing. And how it happens, I have no idea. And it never fails to amaze me at how anything is created at all. Every single object on my desk. I was talking to a great friend of mine the other day who was really inspired by the beach. He's a singer songwriter named Jesse De Natale, a good friend of mine. And we were at a diner, we're having coffee together, and we're talking. And he says, "Look at that coffee cup." And I said, "Do you know what it had to take for someone to have that thought, to be able to sell it to the boss, to get him to make it, and then to be able to manufacture and produce it, and then get it to our table, and all the elements that had to come together to make that single little cup?" Like, if we were really aware of how much energy and magic it takes to create anything, we would be in a constant state of awe. And so as a writer, as a yogi, as a poet, as a mystic, if any of those labels stick, and hopefully they don't, because I don't want to live under titles or labels or names, but really to be in the spirit of creativity is to be aware of how amazing life is and how much magic is teeming inside of every, like your microphone, your amazing eyebrows,
My
my
eyebrows.
CD
No
collection
one's ever
back.
commented on my eyebrows before. Thanks, mate. I mean, yeah,
Did,
it's
it,
not
did
my
I
best.
raise
It's
a
not normally
brow?
my
Did I
best.
raise a
Yeah,
brow?
raise my brow now. Yeah, yeah. That sounds an amazing
So I don't
experience
know.
to be you.
So I
I
don't
mean,
know how it.
who
I
would
don't.
give? I would give
Well, I don't know.
my front teeth to be you. I mean, that sounds just constantly in that zone of creativity. It sounds like. Is that the case? I mean, do you ever have
Well, it's
any downtimes when you're just not creative, when you kind of can't think of anything to write or say? I mean, it just sounds like you feel that
it's a
on all the
blessing.
time.
It's a blessing and a burden because
Yeah,
it's mind. It's a busy mind. It's a creative, active mind, and I think the burden is identifying with the mind and the emotions is when I tend to suffer and feel uncomfortable. So that's why the music is therapy, because it helps me
get it out.
direct
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
thoughts and emotions to move it in a constructive direction.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it will destroy me.
Yeah, for sure. You've got a lot going on there. I mean, just lit 24/7 with, you know, that's just, yeah.
Well, I think it's all of us, man. I really do believe that's the human condition. Was the mind is always
I don't
moving.
know. There's a lot of
The
people out
mind.
there quite dull, really.
But that's only on the surface. Like, if
Oh
you were
yeah,
to,
I'm
if
mucking around. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean,
I get your point, though. I get your point.
everyone's got stuff to get out, but I mean, it happens that you've got to, you've been able to channel it, and to some degree, I've been able to channel my ideas as well. And I think especially if you've got those things inside you and they don't come out, as it says in the Gospels, what's inside you will kill you,
Yeah,
and if you don't
right.
get it out, it will save you,
Wow,
but it will
wow.
kill you. It will kill you.
That is
Yeah, it's the
so
Gospels of
amazing that
Thomas.
you
You got
say
to
that.
read the Gospels of Thomas. Yeah,
I
yeah.
love the
That's
gospel.
the,
So
yeah, yeah.
okay, let me drop a few gems in, because like I love sharing these, and I think everybody imagine is familiar. So it's not nothing new, but seek first the kingdom, and then everything else shall be added unto that. So my understanding of that is that awareness is spirit. Awareness is love. Awareness is the connecting force and factor that unifies all of us. The awareness shining through my eyes is the same awareness shining through your eyes, shining through all eyes. It's life, it's nature, it's spirit. And it has no thoughts, it has no emotions, it has no attachments, it has no judgments, there's no comparisons, it rejects nothing, it needs nothing, it's perfect, it's complete, it's excellent. It's the alpha spirit energy of love that is over everything, that no one can conquer that loving force, because it is the force field, the fabric of life, of creation, of the universe. So if we seek that first, which is the seer, if we seek that shining self, that silent presence first, if we go to awareness, go to spirit first, the kingdom, the inner realm, the space, the presence, the grace, then everything else will fall into place, because it's like putting a one in front of all the zeros. Because without that spirit, without that first thing first, everything is empty. Everything is a zero. That's why we have addiction, why we have a God-sized hole inside of us that can never be satiated or satisfied. Because everything we do externally, whether it's fame, creativity, music, family, work, regardless of what it is that we go outside to try to complete us, it will always inevitably disappoint us, because it's going to change. But spirit never changes. It's always still, always here, always present, always aware. Sat Chit Ananda. And so
Is that a
when we
song?
go,
Did you just come up with that now?
let's do it. Let's do a collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
let's
for sure. That's a
let's
good.
call it
That's a song.
Salubrious.
That
Salubrious?
that's
Maybe that's the name of our band.
salubrious, salubrious. That's a song
Salubrious.
in itself. Yeah, write it, dedicate it to
So,
me, Adam Keen.
so you
Well, look,
said
I
if
mean,
you don't take what's outside of you, it will say it again.
something like if you, oh, I can't say it now. Like if you don't, what's if you don't get what's inside of you outside of yourself, like it will save you or it will kill you. If you don't
Right.
bring forth, I think it's something. If you don't bring forth what's inside you, then it will kill you.
So my
Or it will
my
save you. I'd have
my
to look at
under
the gospel
my
again.
understanding of that is it's love. Like if you don't allow the love to express itself, it's gonna get very uncomfortable. But the tricky part is the kingdom itself. Heaven is love, being in the space. My grandpa used to always say, when you love someone and they love you, that's heaven. You're in heaven. And the tricky part is when we get into the vrittis, the fluctuations of the mind, is the mind creates conditions and attachments, and it becomes transactional, where I give you something so that I can get something back. And so this is like the Gita says, to give and act without attachment to outcome. So the process of giving love means giving awareness, because awareness, love is not an emotion, love is not a thought, it's a presence. Thoughts and emotions always change. Love is changeless. It is still. It is timeless. It never flickers, never fades. So, how do we give love? We can do it through going for a walk, going into the garden,
I think it's
share,
just connecting. Yeah, it's just connecting
connecting.
outside of yourself, basically,
It's
really, isn't it? I
connecting.
mean,
It's
I'm kind of
connection.
somewhat uncomfortable with the word love because I feel it's so ambiguous and hides so much in it, But basically,
Well,
and
yeah,
it's also easily to confuse it with romantic love, which is just
exactly.
sentimental,
Exactly.
which is
Right.
the pitfall there. But I mean, what I say is
Exactly.
connections. Like, look, you're a moth, right? You're a moth, and you
Mm.
want to be drawn to the flame. But if so we're constantly circling around the flame, which in the end, is going to kill us.
Yeah.
If we go into that flame, which is the other. But constantly the self wants to seek something of
Mhm.
resolution in
Right.
connection. But of course, in
Exactly.
going outside yourself, you lose yourself, and therein lies the paradox, really.
Well, that's Maya. When the mind moves, it's Maya. When it's still, it's moksha. So Maya exists for a beautiful reason, because without it, we would have no dance, no drama, no play, no song, no life, no nature. So it's all part of the process, is just to be aware of it, that we're all in Maya, and just to be aware without identifying with it, but being able to see it, celebrate it, and not judge it, and just to understand it.
Listen, guys, if you want to hear more of these lyrics and stuff, and I'm definitely going to turn on to the music now, having heard all this. Look at the notes in the show notes below, and you'll find notes to and links to his music, and hopefully we can splice some stuff in the podcast that you would have enjoyed by now. And
Hey,
it
Adam,
just remains to,
what
yeah,
is if you say the word Maya backwards, what does it say?
AM. This means chicken in Indonesian.
Oh, my cousin,
AM. Yeah, yeah.
my cousin told me a joke the other day. Why did the chicken cross the road?
Uh, yeah.
You're supposed to say why. I don't know why.
Okay. Why? Yeah, yeah.
Why did the chicken cross
Why
the
did it
road?
cross the road? Yeah.
To visit the moron. Knock knock.
It'll take me some time to get that, but I'll come back to you. Yeah, 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 yeah.
But it is true.
But
Like, we can be more off or more on, and I'm definitely more on.
I think you are. There's no doubt about that. And it's been
More
like one of
on.
the best chats I've had. Look, I always do this. I don't cut it a bit short because we've all, we don't want people tuning out too quick. But look, I always end with saying, give me a
Oh,
guilty pleasure.
by the way, I tuned
What
out a long time ago.
No, you were very much on. I mean,
More
if
on.
that's tuned out, I don't know what's on. Give me a guilty pleasure and inspiration to finish this chat.
A
One guilty
guilty.
pleasure and one inspiration. Yeah,
Oh,
quickly. Don't
they're
think too
all
much because
guilty
otherwise
pleasures.
you'll ruin it.
Oh, like, what do I enjoy?
Yeah, like
Like,
something that inspires you and something which you feel like is a pleasure, which is nothing to do with yoga or anything so-called spiritual. Yeah.
oh, driving fast.
Ah, that's a good one. That's a good one. That's the first. That's the
Yeah.
first of the. Yep. Well, you've done well there. Fast
Yeah.
driving. Yeah. Not.
Loud music while
Yeah.
driving
Right.
fast is great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just let's see what kind of
And then
feedback we
also
get from that. Yeah.
driving really slow with loud music is nice too. Yeah.
Obviously, driving fast within the speed limit in a respectable
Yes,
kind of
of
manner,
course.
not
Yeah.
yeah. And what about inspiration?
Oh, inspiration is really the breath. Is being able to be aware of who's breathing everybody, and being sort of humbled by that. This force that keeps us all here, that sustains us, that heals us, that keeps us alive, and just being in awe of how generous and how amazing and how abundant and how beautiful and graceful life is. It's pretty awesome.
Nice. All right, that's a wrap. Nick, MC Yogi, thanks for joining me.
Nice.
And
I appreciate you, man.
yeah,
That was fun.
cheers. That was a great one. Thank you.
Yeah, buddy. Anytime, man. That's fun.